poetry lovers. You're tuned in to Poetics, and I am so glad you're here for another deep dive into the world of verse. For those just joining us, I'm Tamara Rockwood, and when I'm not chatting with you here, I'm running Bainbridge Island Press with my husband Ben, surrounded by the misty magic of Pacific Northwest. You know, between recording these episodes and working with our poets, I've been reflecting on what an incredible journey this has been. Since we opened our doors coming up on 2 years ago, we've had the joy of bringing 9 collections into the world, each one its own universe of voice and vision. We've been enjoying ourselves all the time by hosting intimate poetry readings or hosting our booth at bustling book festivals. Overall, the energy and creativity in the poetry community never fails to inspire me. So grab that cup of coffee or tea, find your favorite listening spot, and let's explore today's poetic adventure together. You're listening to Poetics. So today we are exploring one of the most influential poems of the 20th century. It might be the most misunderstood. It might be the most avoided poem in the 20th century, but it is T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And let me tell you, if you think poetry isn't relevant anymore, this one might change your mind. Walk with me. Imagine walking through a world where everything seems to be falling apart. That's exactly what Eliot gives us in The Wasteland. Written in the aftermath of World War I, this poem isn't just about one breakdown. It's about every kind of breakdown that you can imagine. Marriages are crumbling, relationships are failing, language itself is coming apart at the seams. The war had shattered people's faith in civilization, and Eliot's poem asks us the burning question: how can art even respond to a world that's gone so wrong? You know what's fascinating about this? The way that Eliot shows us people just existing. There is this haunting image in the poem of commuters crossing London Bridge every morning, and Eliot compares them to crowds of souls flowing into hell in Dante's Inferno, which is pretty dark stuff, right? But it gets at something so real about the modern life that he knew. Take this scene with a young typist in the poem. She has this completely meaningless encounter with a young lover covered in acne, and afterwards, she just smooths her hair and puts on a record like nothing happened, because nothing did happen, and that's the point. And then here is something wild at the beginning. The poem opens with this reference to an ancient Roman literature about the Sibyl, this prophetic figure from Greek mythology. She was granted eternal life, but not eternal youth. And she ends up trapped in this cage, withering away forever. And when someone asks what she wants, her answer is heartbreaking: I want to die. It's pretty heavy stuff, but it sets up everything that follows. Now, Eliot does this incredible thing throughout the poem. He weaves together references to all these dead civilizations and their literature. So you'll be reading about someone in a dingy London pub talking about their failing marriage, and suddenly you're in the world of Shakespeare with echoes of Ophelia that has her tragic character who went mad and drowned herself. And it's like Eliot is suggesting that maybe death is the only way out of the wasteland that we're all trapped in. It gets better. Well, this poem doesn't get better, but I hope that it's not too dark. It's I don't know. It's a dark poem. I'm sorry. But here's what makes this poem revolutionary. Eliot found poetry in the most unlikely places. So he took the modern world that he knew, with its motor cars, its tinned food, its jazz records, its pub conversations, and he turned it into something profound. He created a new language for poetry that could capture the alienation and despair of the urban life that he saw and that he experienced. But what's really interesting, one of the first reviewers of the poem apparently, quote unquote, overunderstood it, at least according to Eliot. But nearly a century later, we're still trying to fully grasp what this poem means. And maybe that's the point. Like the characters wandering around in Eliot's wasteland, we are all still trying to make sense of our own modern world. And isn't that what great literature does? It gives us new ways to understand our world, even if we can never fully understand it. So the poem The Wasteland is it's pretty hefty. It's 434 lines long, and it's divided into 5 sections. So the first section is the burial of the dead. Then there is a game of chess, the fire sermon, death by water, and then it ends with what the thunder said. The poem was published in 1922, and it's interesting to note that the original manuscript was about twice as long before a good friend of Eliot, Ezra Pound, helped to edit it down to its final form. And so this relatively short section, poem, the section in Death of Water in the middle is particularly notable because it has a stark contrast to the longer sections, and it serves as kind of a pivot point in the middle of the poem. So I am not going to read the whole poem because it is a little long, it's a little dark, and I would like you to return to this podcast. I don't think it would be fair to read the whole thing, but it's available online. It's available anywhere. I encourage you to find it. But I will be reading The Burial of the Dead. And it starts with the epigraph, which is in Latin and Greek. And I took 3 years of German in high school, Dankeschön. And so my pronunciation is not going to be on point. I spent 2 years during the pandemic trying to learn French because, I don't know, it was that and sourdough. And that didn't work either. So I'm going to give it my best, and I'm going to apologize before. So the beginning is an epigraph. It was from Paternoster, his Satyricon. In English, it translates to, "With my own eyes, I saw the Sibyl at Cumae hanging in a jar, and when the boys asked her, 'Sibyl, what do you want?' she answered, 'I want to die.' Nam silam quidiam cumis ego ipsa oculis meus vidi in ampulla pendre et cum illi pueri desiderent." And then the rest is in Greek, and I can't read Greek yet. But then the second part is in Italian, and it is Il miglior fabbro, and that's Italian for the better craftsman or the better maker, and that is Eliot's dedication to Ezra Pound. So that's the beginning of the poem. But the wasteland and the burial of the dead is as follows. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. Summer surprised us, coming over the Starnbergesse with a shower of rain. We stopped in the colonnade and went on in sunlight into the Hofgarten and drank coffee and talked for an hour. Bin gar keine Russen, stamm aus Litauen echt Deutsch. And when we were children, staying at the Archduke's, my cousin's, he took me out on a sled, and I was frightened. He said, Marie, Marie, hold on tight. And down we went in the mountains. There you feel free. I read much of the night and go south in the winter. What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images where the sun beats and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water. Only there is shadow under this red rock. Come in under the shadow of this red rock, and I will show you something different from either your shadow at morning striding behind you or your shadow at evening rising to meet you. I will show you fear in a handful of dust. Frisch wird der Wind, der heimt zu mein Kind, wo weilst du? You gave me hyacinths first a year ago. They called me the hyacinth girl, yet when we came back late from the hyacinth garden, your arms full and your hair wet, I could not speak, and my eyes failed. I was neither living nor dead, and I knew nothing. Looking into the heart of light, the silence, odunt lir das Meer. Madame Sosostres, famous clairvoyant, had a bad cold. Nevertheless, it is known to be the wisest woman in Europe. With a wicked pack of cards, here, said she, is your card, the drowned Phoenician sailor. Those were pearls that were his eyes. Look. Here is Belladonna, the lady of the rocks, the lady of situations. Here is the man with 3 staves, and here is the wheel, and here is the one-eyed merchant, and this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see. I do not find the hanged man, fear death by water. I see crowds of people walking round in a ring. Thank you. If you see dear Miss Equitone, tell her I bring the horoscope myself. One must be so careful these days. Unreal city. Under the brown fog of a winter dawn, a crowd flowed over London Bridge. So many. I had not thought death had undone so many. Sighs, short and infrequent, were exhaled, and each man fixed his eyes before his feet, flowed up the hill and down King William's Street to where St. Mary Woolnoth kept the hours with a dead sound on the final stroke of 9. There I saw one I knew and stopped him, crying, Stetson, you were with me in the ships at Mylay. That corpse you planted last year in your garden, has it begun to sprout? Will it bloom this year, or has the sudden frost disturbed its bed? Oh, keep the dog far hence, that's fiend to men, or with its nails he'll dig it up again. You, hypocrite, lecturer, mon semblable, mon frère. That is Burial of the Dead. That is the first part of The Wasteland. There's a lot there, and there are a lot of references. It seems confusing. It seems nonlinear, and I can't say it's not. So there are references in here that are really fascinating. And so at the beginning, we have the reference to Sybil and Patroclus. And then we have an entire line that in the beginning, which is line 12, I am not Russian at all. I come from Lithuania. I am a real German. What does that mean? Why is it there? There's also a scene of My Past by Countess Marie Lariche, and there's also in line 20, Ezekiel chapter 2, verse 7, there's a reference to Ecclesiastes in on line 23 of chapter 12, verse 5. There is John Donne's Devotions, and Evelyn Waugh took this phrase out of Dust from his novel Handful of Dust. There is also The Wind Blows Fresh to My Homeland, My Irish Girl, Where Are You Lingering? And that's from Tristan and Isolde in verses 5 through 8 by Wagner. There's a lot of references, and why are they there? Is he just trying to be pretentious? Is he just trying to make his audience feel like an idiot? Is he tone deaf to the world? What is happening? So right now, I want to answer those questions by talking about the poetic genre of modernism, which happened between 1890 and 1940, 1945. Modernism was a revolutionary cultural movement that emerged in the late 1800s, and it reached its peak just before World War I. It was born from massive changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution, and it represented a dramatic shift in how artists and writers viewed the world and their craft. So unlike their romantic predecessors from the Romantic genre, which is in the early 1800s, that's the next episode, so tune in. But unlike their romantic predecessors in poetry who emphasized on emotion and celebrated nature's sublime beauty, I'm thinking Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I'm thinking Wordsworth. I'm thinking Tennyson. Who wandered like a lonely cloud? Who had a field of daffodils? That was romantic. It was nature's sublime beauty. Modernist writers, about 100 years later, became deeply skeptical of language itself and questioned traditional ways of expressing meaning. They challenged conventional wisdom and broke from established artistic traditions. So some key features of literary modernism is experimentation with time and perspective, and we can see that in Henry James, Virginia Woolf, Joseph Conrad. Breaking conventional grammar and syntax, we can see E. E. Cummings, absolutely, Gertrude Stein's Parish Writings, and radical poetic innovation, which we can see through Ezra Pound especially, but there are a few others that I really like, that I think if you're going to understand modernism in poetry, you need to read Claude McKay, Dylan Thomas, Edna St. Vincent Millay, Langston Hughes, Robert Frost, Emily Dickinson, Wordsworth, Auden, County Cullen, a few more, E. Cummings, Dorothy Parker. There's a few more. Hold on. Yeats and Marianne Moore and William Carlos Williams, Wallace Stevens, Ezra Pound, and T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland, is what modernism is culminated in. And that's why I'm going through it. And also I like it. So T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland became modernism's defining text, featuring multiple languages, multiple literary references, and varied writing styles. The movement spawned numerous sub-movements, including Dadaism, Futurism, Imagism, Objectivism, Surrealism, and all of these would later influence postmodernism, which was post-1945. But in The Wasteland, it has become identified as the representative poem of the modernist canon, and it indicates the pervasive sense of disillusionment about the current state of affairs in the modern society, especially post-World War Europe, manifesting itself symbolically through sacred and profane. So that, I hope, helps explain it a little bit. So just a little bit about T.S. Eliot so we understand who's writing this. He was one of the most important poets of the 20th century, and although he actually started out as a banker, we all have different vocations. He was born in St. Louis in 1888, and he actually made his way to England in 1914 and staying there for good, and eventually becoming a British citizen. His poem, The Wasteland, basically changed modern poetry as we know it. That's my alarm to tell me to go to the gym, but the gym has to wait. It changed modern poetry, and so the way that I picture it is Europe was trying to make sense of World War I, and Eliot writes this incredibly complex poem that captures all that post-war confusion and cultural fragmentation. And it's full of different languages, literary references, and shifting voices, which was revolutionary for its time. It's revolutionary now. But he believed that poetry needed to evolve in order to reflect the individual experience. And he yearned for the timeless classical references that had been used in poetry long before him. So his contribution to modernist poetry was utilizing these classical references juxtaposed with modern, gritty, honest, and painfully authentic symbolism and imagery. All right, that is all for today, poetry friends. I have gone 10 minutes over my 10-minute podcast, but I'm keeping it. I'm not cutting any of this. I think it's important, and I think it's a good poem to understand. So if you've enjoyed diving into the world of verse with us, please join us next time. We've got more poets to meet, more poems to explore, and more literary adventures to share. So in the meantime, keep reading, keep writing, and keep poetry close to your heart. Thank you for joining POETICS podcast, where we bring poetry to life, one verse at a time.